Greetings gamers, I'm Anton and welcome to episode 3 of our Making a Fantasy map series. This series aims to take you from a rough hand-drawn sketch of an idea all the way through to a print-ready polished piece. In episode 1 we made our landforms, we decided on our plate tectonics, we added our mountains and we worked on a height map. In episode 2 we added our waterways and we added our forests. So if you haven't seen those already, click the links up here and watch those first. In episode 3 we're going to start working on our settlements, we're going to work on our borders, and I'm going to show you how to take your finished map and use it to shape your world building. Without further ado, let's dive into it and start world building in our new map. For this stage of the map making process, I'll be moving out of Wonderdraft and into Serif's Page Plus, which is a desktop publishing tool. Now you could use Photoshop or GIMP, any other desktop publishing software, or even Wonderdraft to do all these following steps, but I really like the flexibility I get in Serif Page Plus because I'm really familiar with it. I like the ability to add layers and hide them and reveal different pieces of information about my map depending on what I need at the time. Before we start planning our borders, placing our settlements, one thing that I like to do is think about the natural resources of our world. This is the thing that people are most often going to come into conflict over, the different resources available to them. So while it might seem like a needless level of detail for like a D&D campaign map, I promise you that taking this extra step is going to result in stories and world building that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise that will crop up as a result of having this extra layer to your map. Here is a list of the common things that you might find in terms of resources in a D&D or fantasy map. They're the things that I've based my map off. And to start with, I'm going to focus only on the hard materials because those are the sort of things that they will be in one place and they'll be in that place for a huge period of time. All of the growable items, all of the livestock, that can all be moved around, but the hard materials that you have to mine or excavate, those are going to be there for centuries or more. I tend to place most of my hard materials in mountain ranges. Now this is another area where you can get really deep into the detail. You could research where in the world geologically all these different materials actually form to make it really true to life. But what we're going for here and what we've been going for in the entire series is just that little bit extra realism to make it make sense in the world, but not so much that we need to spend half a year researching where limestone will be found versus granite. Just placing some resources and knowing where they are gets us closer to that goal of more realism. Not perfectly realistic, but more realistic. The absolute must-haves in terms of hard materials, if you're going to be running a fantasy setting, in my opinion, are copper, silver, gold, and iron. Obviously, copper, silver, and gold form the basis of your currencies, so you want them to be quite common, with copper being the most common, gold being the least common, and then iron in most settings is going to be the basis for weapons and armor, so you want that to be fairly easy to come by as well. Otherwise, if you have some other material that's more abundant than iron, why would the people have not adopted that as their primary resource for making tools and weapons and armor? And that could be a big part of your world building. Maybe you have a different metal that's much more abundant than iron, and iron is very rare. So in your world, all of the weapons are made from this other metal, and iron weapons are the supreme, the pinnacle of weapon technology. So all I do is I come into my desktop publishing tool, so Serif in this case, and I'm just going to grab a line tool, change the line width on it, let's say 2.5, and choose a color. Let's go for a nice orangey color for copper. And I'm just going to zoom into my map and we're just going to choose some places for copper to be. So some copper might be here, and then we'll change the coloring. And from there you just go all around your map and do it for every single resource. And when you're finished, you'll have something that looks like this. Now, this is my map of all the different resources. So we've got copper and silver and gold, we've got jade and precious gems, we've got iron, we've got pockets of oil and a large area of whale hunting, all of these different things that occur in my world, in the world of Sengal, and all of these are going to inform us as we move forward on our settlements, on our borders, on which areas have the most power, on things like how conflicts have evolved over the centuries based on these materials. And this is that extra level of realism that you just don't get if you don't do this. So as an example, over here on the right near our volcano, I've added some veins of obsidian because they would occur near the volcano. Similarly, over here on the west, I've added some veins of obsidian to where the meteor will have crashed into this island millennia ago. And as I touched on briefly, this area off the western coast, that is going to be prime whale farming and whale hunting space in the sea. And that's going to come in important when we're developing our world building later on, because such a rich resource is going to be hotly fought over. Now that we have all of our major natural resources, we know where everything is physically in our world, it's time to start thinking about our settlements. At this stage and on this scale of the map, I only want to focus on the most important settlements. We can assume that the blank area between any two towns or cities that we place will have multiple villages and hamlets, but for this scale, I don't want to map them all because it would just get really messy. Depending on how big you wanted to print this out in the end though, that is something you could consider. If you were going to export your map at 8K and then print an absolutely huge map to go on a wall, let's say, maybe you'd want to go in and add those smaller settlements. So if they want to go right up to it and have a look, they get all that lovely little detail that you just don't get when you pull really far back. At this stage of the process, we are not going to name anything. The next step is to just get some settlements in using the information we have on our map. All the naming can come much later on, but for now we just need to know where major settlements will have developed. For a settlement to develop, it needs access to fresh water, it needs access to building materials to build shelters, etc., and it needs access to some food source. Which means that almost all of our settlements are either going to form around a natural resource, such as a river or a forest, or they're going to form on a trade route where they can get access to all these other materials really easily. If your rivers are large enough, for example, this huge river that runs through the center of our map, if they're large enough that boats can travel on them, well, you'll get settlements popping up all along that river as people capitalize on the trade that moves up and down that waterway. Or if you've got a road that links two major settlements, chances are something is going to spring up on that road to take advantage of the people moving between those places and capitalize on trade there. So this stage is about looking at your map and thinking where people would be likely to build a settlement. A village that's built on the banks of a river that then builds a bridge connecting two trade routes between two cities, well, chances are that village is going to grow to be a town, and if there is enough natural resources and food available in the area, that town will probably grow to be a city because there will be people coming from multiple different locations traveling through that area to utilize the bridge or the roads, and it will grow over time. However, if that area doesn't have enough food or water to sustain a larger population, chances are it will just be a smaller trade hub where people come to move through to go to the next location. So you want to go around your whole map and add towns and cities anywhere that you think they would grow based on the resources available. So if we choose an area of our map, let's say this region here, we can see that there are multiple rivers, so there'd be good access to fresh water. It's a forested area, so there would be plenty of materials to build temporary settlements. It's near the mountains, so there'd be stone and other hard materials for building longer settlements. And then we have these veins of different natural resources that a settlement in that region could profit from. And then once you've been around your entire map and placed all of your settlements, your towns, your cities, you'll have something that looks like this. You can see that I've gone around the entire map and added settlements to the areas that I think that they would be most likely to spring up based on the resources available and the geography. So if I just zoom in a little bit here, you can see that I have used different symbols for towns and cities just to make them a bit visually different, and I've gone around and placed them on the whole map. Now we know where our settlements are based on the geography, it's time to work on our borders. The process for making your borders is going to be the same whether you're working on the borders of nations, the borders of states, or even just local area borders. We're going to do it in 2 stages to make it as realistic as possible without spending a huge amount of time on it. Stage 1 is going to be following the natural borders of our land based on our map, so we'll be following things like coastlines and rivers. And then stage 2 is to look at our resources, look at our settlements, and look at the natural borders and use all of that information to decide where conflict will have pushed our borders and pulled our borders, and how our borders will change based on what we know about our world now. So to start making our borders, I usually start in the same way. I will choose somewhere that has a coastline or a really strong natural feature that I can follow. So we're going to start up here in the northeast of our map, and I'm just going to start following this coastline. Now I'll follow the coastline until I reach some sort of boundary, some natural boundary. So we keep going around, and every time we reach something like a river, you have to make a choice. You have to decide, is this river big enough that we end our border there? Now, the map I'm making is quite advanced. It's already formed into an empire, so this particular river probably isn't enough to form the basis of a border. If we were working on something earlier, before a centralized government, this river probably would be enough to stop a border for a province or a region, and we just have a little section. But that's not what we're working with, so we keep going. And then we come to another river, and we have to make another decision. Is this river enough to form a barrier between 2 regions? It's not really any bigger than the other one, so I would say no, and we keep moving until we get to this mountain range. Now this mountain range comes almost all the way to the sea, and it's quite a dense mountain range. It covers many miles, so I would say that that is enough of a natural barrier to prevent people on the south of that mountain range attacking people on the north through it. So we start to bring our border back in around the mountain range until we hit this river. Now this river is significantly larger than the 2 smaller ones on the coastline, and I think it is big enough to form the basis of a border. So then we start following the river instead of following the coast or the mountains. We follow the river right the way back up until we hit the next big obstacle. As it happens, for this river, there is no large obstacle right until we get to the coast. So that forms one entire region. So we just need to give that a color. Let's reduce the opacity of the color a little bit there, and we can drop the line significantly too. We'll color the line, and there we go. That is one region in our world made. We know based on the coastline, the mountain, and the river that this is probably going to be a region. How that will change based on conflict in our world, well, that's going to depend. But for now, that is one of our regions, and we'll go around the entire map and do this for every single region. One thing to note with your borders is that you don't want to be precious with them. You don't want to draw a border and then be absolutely sure that is where the border is, it cannot change, because you want to leave yourself open for that flexibility for things to change based on your story. When I was building out Sengal, I thought, well, I'll probably have about 9 borders. But once I started building the borders, I can tell that it's going to be more than 9, and that is perfectly okay. Changing what I expected it to be means that I end up with a much more realistic map. So Sengal has a really good example of where borders are going to become muddled thanks to conflict, and that's this little island here off the northwest coast. Now this entire region down here, this long thin region here, all of that is probably going to be one province. And then this area here is going to be a second province. So you can see that in terms of its distance, it's quite close to two major provinces. So who takes control of that island? Initially, that island would be its own small province. It has some copper on there, it would be its own thing. But both of these areas are near enough to the oil that's found in the sea and to this huge, vast resource of whales that they would almost certainly want a base on this island to operate their whaling operation from. Now this island is probably not going to be resource rich enough to defend itself from any larger force. So if either of our two nearby provinces went and tried to take control of the island, they would be relatively successful without any complications. It would be easy for them to just roll over this island and take control. The problem and our conflict comes from the fact that there are two provinces really close enough that they could both benefit from the resources in the area and close enough that they could both get to the area. Now these two regions will probably have spent many years in conflict over who controls this island. And that's one of the decisions you're going to have to make in your world building, is to decide who controls this island. In the time that our story, our game or our writing takes place, who is in control of this island? Is it going to be this northern province or the southern province? Or are they still going to be in conflict over it? And whatever you decide isn't really relevant. What matters is that you're thinking about it. And if your characters or your players go to that island over the course of your game or your story, then it's going to come up. Are they controlled by the north or the south? If they're controlled by the north, maybe they're still being attacked by the south, and that'll play a part in the story, or vice versa. If it's still an open conflict, maybe just getting to the island would be really hard because people would be paranoid that your characters or your players would be working on behalf of one of these two factions vying over control of the island. Now, that assumes that both of our provinces that might want to take this island are equal, but we can look at our map and see very quickly that they're not equal. This northern province that runs all the way down the coast, you can see it has access to quite a large amount of resources, particularly copper. There's a lot of copper resources in these mountains, as well as a little bit of silver and plenty of iron. Whereas down here in the south, this southern province has access to a little bit of copper and a significant amount of lumber, but it doesn't have access to a huge variety of hard materials, resources. But it's vast, so it probably has access to a lot of people. So whereas our northern province is probably the more technologically advanced, our southern province probably has much greater manpower to fight this conflict over. And that's something you could incorporate into your game or your story when the characters interact with these various factions. This northern province will be much richer and have much better resources, but the southern province will have far more troops at their disposal. Hopefully this illustrates how mapping out your resources, mapping out your settlements, and deciding all of these things, all of your boundaries before you really start world building, will give you ideas that you'd never have come up with otherwise. I could have drawn this map and done nothing with the resources, done no boundaries, and that island would probably just be an island. The players or the characters get to that island, they might ask who controls it, and it wouldn't really matter. But because we've gone through the trouble to decide where our resources are, to start building our borders based on natural boundaries, and then thinking about how they work in relation to our resources, we've got stories developing that have nothing to do with anything that we've planned and nothing to do with anything that we've put in place. It's just the map is giving us all of this juicy story information. If you do this across your entire map, who knows how many stories are going to develop. For example, over here on the east, I've decided that this is going to be where the Emperor's capital is. Now, looking at the map and drawing the natural borders, we would probably come down the mountains here, across these rivers, across this gap to the next batch of mountains, and around the coastline. So really roughly that kind of area. And that's fine. That is a perfectly reasonable border. But then we've got nothing really here by this city to act as a natural border. There is some forest and a little bit of mountain, but nothing that would stop a large movement of troops. So if this is the Emperor's territory and the Emperor wants to expand that territory, where would they expand? They'd expand westward into this plain. And looking at our resources, there's nothing that would stand in their way all the way up to these rivers. So I would argue that instead of this being our border, it would stretch all the way along the mountains, all the way to this river, down, following the river, back up to the mountains, and then back down to the coasts and around, which basically doubles the size of our region and gives us a much more interesting story. The Emperor has secured this eastern area and has started pushing westward. Maybe that's why they are the Emperor, because they've been in this position that they can start expanding and gaining new territories when other people couldn't. Maybe they've proclaimed themselves Emperor, and at the moment there's just no one to stop them saying they're the Emperor. So make sure to do this across your entire map for all of your borders, and obviously you want to take as many notes as you can as you're doing this. All these little stories that you start coming up with when you interact, when two borders interact, and you think, well, how would they push and pull? This area is near natural resources and they're currently controlled by this other province. Well, they'll push through, they'll take them. How did they take them? Make notes on everything like that, and you'll have a really strong world history to your map before you even start sitting down to do any dedicated world building, just based on the features of your map. And here you can see my finished political border map. I went through and added borders to all of the major provinces. These two large areas here are actually made up of dozens or hundreds of lesser lords and lesser clans, which is why they don't have their own region. They're not powerful enough to maintain an entire region, so it's just a large stretch of land filled with lesser clans. Now we have our borders finished and know where our settlements are and all our resources, we can start working on some more concrete world building, which is going to start with naming our provinces. When I first started planning Senegal, I thought there would be about 9 different provinces across the region. I've ended up with more than that. I've ended up with 10 major provinces and then those 2 unincorporated areas that will be filled with lots and lots of lesser clans. So we need to come up with 10 different names for our regions. Again, I'm going to draw on ancient China and ancient Japan for my naming, and I'm going to go with names that evoke different natural elements. So they might be words to describe natural features or animals or different traits of clans. In fact, one of the things that I really like the most is naming these different clans after animals. Maybe that isn't their formal name, but informally people would just refer to them as the animal name of their clan. So I had to come up with 10 different names associated with 10 different animals, which is what I did right here. To get those names, I predominantly used Google Translate. Between Chinese and Japanese, I would translate various words, either the animal directly or something that described them. So for the snake clan, I translated various words for venom or poison or constrictor and things like that until I got enough syllables that I liked. A few of the clans are direct translations. So Hoshi, the dragon clan, that is the translation for star, and that's because in my current campaign, which takes place in Valoroth, which is across the sea, the kings of Valoroth, the dragon kings of Valoroth, they came originally from Senegal, and their surname, their family name is Asta, which means star. So I wanted to carry that across and show that bridge between where the kings from the realm my players have already played in came from and this new realm. The most important thing to decide on was where the Emperor's clan was going to be and what the Emperor's clan was going to be. You saw that previously I had decided that this region here, this big red region, was going to be the Emperor's clan, and when it came time to name them, I wanted something that evoked this sense of lightning conquest. We've seen here how the Emperor's dominion has pushed further and further away from where it started, and I wanted something that evoked that sense of expansion, that rapid expansion, those lightning strikes. And when I was looking at the names, I wanted to avoid Dragon Clan. I didn't want the Dragon Clan to rule Sengal like the Dragon Kings rule Valeroth, and the Dragon Emperor is a bit cliche for my liking. So I looked predominantly at the crane and the tiger, and after a little bit of research, I actually discovered that the tiger is faster in short bursts than the crane, so I ended up going with the Tiger Clan. For its proper name, I chose Kaze Feng, and I really like this because Feng is close enough to Fang that it immediately draws up these images of sharp teeth and of a dangerous predator, which is what I want from this emperor. And that leaves us just needing to decide on the names of the other clans, which I spent a little time doing some translating, figuring out what I wanted, and what we've ended up with are 10 distinct clans, each with their own animal associated with it to form the basis of their emblems and their informal names. And we've ended up with a really interesting map. We've got our base map here. If I just turn off these, we've got our base map, which we spent the first 2 episodes building, and in of itself would be perfect to use for a D&D campaign. But then by spending a little bit of time and working out the resources, the borders, naming things, what we've ended up with is something far more interesting, and we can use this as we go forward in our world building and throughout the course of the story that we either are writing or telling with our players if it's an RPG game. And we can use all of these things that we've done to build on that. Let's say that our players decide to go to the Langchi province. Well, we can open up our resource map and we can look that they have access to all of these metals up here in the mountains. This lake here is only really able to be accessed by Langchi, so it would probably be quite a sacred place to them maybe, and we'd know what resources they have available and we could build that into our world. Similarly, we can see that jade, we have 2 instances of jade in our world, one of which is down here and no one really controls that, and the other is in the Sarosi province. Maybe in that region their main resource might be jade. And we have countless examples all over the map of ways that we can use the borders, the different resources that we've made, and all our other information, our height map from previous episodes, everything will all come together and help us build a more realistic world for our players to play in. I'll leave links to all the full resolution images of the base map as well as the named areas and the borders down in the description below, so you can take a really good look at this map overall. And I really hope that you've enjoyed this series. I hope it's inspired you and given you some ideas on your own world building, and I hope it's encouraged you to go and try to make a campaign map. No matter what level of skill you have, hopefully you'll be able to follow along with these tutorials and build something that you can be proud of and put in front of your players, and something that you can all game in for years to come. I'd love to hear about your worlds down in the comments below, so share some pictures of your maps with me. Tell me about your worlds down in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like button because it really helps me out. It lets YouTube know that these videos are worth putting in front of people. So if you think that this is a good resource that other dungeon masters, world builders, writers would be able to use these videos, please just hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds and it really helps YouTube push it to other people. And don't forget to subscribe. I release new RPG, world building and tabletop related content every week. And if you want to help support me and get access to even more RPG resources, check out my Patreon down below. Every month I release new packs like NPC packs, new game aids, and all sorts of other resources for dungeon masters and game masters to put into their game. But until next time, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here and you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. I release a new RPG, tabletop and world building related content every single week. And if you enjoy what I do here and want to help the channel grow, consider supporting me on Patreon. And if you want to keep watching, I've got another couple videos over there. But until next time, happy gaming.